They also generated an extraordinary wealth of environmental law that's now being used by activists around the country and community members to protect their own local resources. I want to say one other thing, which is this. And this is what I started off talking about. And it's the most important point, which is the reason that we protect these resources is not for the sake of the fishes and the birds, but because we recognize that nature enriches us. It enriches us economically, yes, the base of our economy, and we ignore that at our peril. The economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. But it also enriches us aesthetically and recreationally and culturally and historically and spiritually. And human beings have other appetites besides money. And if we don't feed them, we're not going to grow up. We're not going to become the kind of beings we're supposed to become. We're not going to fulfill ourselves and our destiny in the eyes of the Creator. And when we destroy nature, we diminish ourselves. We impoverish our children. And that is particularly important for people to understand in this country, because we are bound together by the land and by our relationship with wilderness. You look around this room, we come from all over the place. We don't share, Americans are unique in history. We don't share a common culture or religion or color or language or history. What allows us to call ourselves a nation or a community? You know, a Frenchman doesn't have to worry about his Frenchiness. He speaks French, he looks like other Frenchmen, he probably lives in France. But in America, we come from all over the place. What allows us to call ourselves a nation? Two things. One is shared values, which is a commitment to constitutional democracy, and the other is the land. And when we treat the land with contempt, what we're saying is this isn't really about building communities, this is about real estate. This is a commodity upon which a bunch of strangers have gathered to increase the size of their piles and then to keep moving. And whoever dies with the most stuff wins. And that's the best that we can say about our country? I don't think so. I think that most of us believe that this country has a special mission in history, which is to create cities on a hill, lamps to the other nations around the world, paradigms for what human beings can accomplish if we all work together, all the different kinds of people around the globe, and maintain our focus on a spiritual mission. And that vision has been articulated from the beginning of American history and adopted by every subsequent wave of immigrants that came into our country, that this nation has a special mission. And really, our relationship to the land is a critical part of that. If you look from the beginning of time, our cultural leaders and political leaders and theological leaders were telling the American people, you don't have to worry. You don't have to be ashamed, because you don't have the 1,500 years that they have of culture that they have in Europe with the architecture and the language and the poetry, because you have a relationship with wilderness which is the undiluted work of the Creator, and that is going to be the source of your virtues and your values and your character as a people. And throughout American literature, our culture, every valid piece of American literature from the beginning, from James Fenimore Cooper on, has if you look at the unifying theme, it is this conviction that nature, and particularly wilderness, is the critical defining element of American culture. In our history, our literature, our poetry, art, that theme is celebrated, that the American experience with nature and wilderness is so critical to defining who we are as a people. We're not protecting those ancient forests in the Pacific Northwest, as Rush Limbaugh loves to say, for the sake of a spotted owl. We're preserving those forests because we believe that the trees have more value to humanity standing than they would have if we cut them down, because they link us to our past and to who we are as a people and to our sense of community and our values as a nation. And I'm not fighting to save the Hudson River for the sake of the shad or the sturgeon or the striped bass, but because I believe my life will be richer and my children's lives will be richer if we live in a world where there are shad and sturgeon and stripers in the Hudson, and where my children can see the men in their little boats, open boats, doing what they've been doing for generations, and touch them when they come to shore to repair their nets or to wait out the tides, and in doing that, connect themselves to 350 years of New York State history, and understand that they're part of something larger than themselves. They're part of a continuum. They're part of a community. I don't want my children to grow up in a world where there are no commercial fishermen on the Hudson, where they're all, it's factory ships 200 miles off the shore, and human beings have, and the community has no contact with that, or no interaction, no interface, and where there are no family farmers, where it's all, corporate industrial meat production, and where where the landscapes in West Virginia have been leveled, and we've lost touch with the landscapes that really formed us as a people and formed our identity. And we've lost touch with the seasons and the tides and the things that connect us to the 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops, and that connect us ultimately to God. And I don't believe that nature is God, or that we ought to be worshiping it as God. But I do believe that it's the way that God communicates to us most forcefully. And God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great books of those religions, through wise people, and through art and literature and music and poetry, but nowhere with such clarity and force and detail and texture and grace and joy as through creation. And for me, therefore, destroying these things is the moral equivalent of destroying the landscapes of West Virginia and swallowing the rivers, in hidden mines. And it's the moral equivalent of tearing the last pages out of the last Bible or Torah or Talmud or Quran on earth. It's a cost that I don't believe that it's prudent for us to impose upon ourselves, and I doubt if we have the right to impose it upon our children. And that's really all that environmental advocacy is about. It's recognizing that we have an obligation to the next generation who doesn't vote, and the other people within our communities who don't participate in the political process because they're too poor, or they speak a different language, or they come from dysfunctional neighborhoods. But still they have a right to clean air and clean water and abundant fisheries and nice beaches and enriching environments. And we have our obligation to that generation and to those people, those other members of our community, is expressed by the term sustainability. And all that word means is that God wants us to use the things that we've been given, the bounties of the earth, to enrich ourselves, to improve our lives, and to serve others. But we can't use them up. We can't sell the farm piece by piece in order to pay for the groceries. We can't drain the pond to catch the fish. We can't cut down the mountain to get at the coal. There's other ways that we can do that. And we can live off the interests, but we can't go into the capital. That belongs to our children. And I would close this with a proverb from the Lakota people. I mean, what we do is, as environmental advocates, is we elbow our way into those back hallways in the state capitals or on Capitol Hill where the big shots are, cutting up the pie that belongs to you and me and to our children, where they're, cutting up the fresh water, the clean water, swallowing the rivers, and polluting the air and destroying the fisheries. And they're taking those public trust assets that the law says you can't touch. And this is, as I said, ancient law. It's called natural law, which means divine rights, rights that were endowed upon us by God and that no human organization can take away. And they are cutting up that pie, the fresh air, the clean water, the endangered species, and they're liquidating it for cash, and they're dividing it among themselves. And we elbow our way into those convocations, and we say, we are emissaries for the future, and we demand an accounting. We want to know what you're doing with things that don't belong to you, with things that belong to our children. And I'll close, I said, with a proverb from the Lakota people, which has been expropriated to some extent by the environmental movement, where they said we didn't inherit this planet from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I would add to that, that if we don't return to them something that is roughly the equivalent of what we received, that they'll have the right to ask us some very difficult questions. Thank you all very much for having me here at Charleston, and thanks for your commitment to these issues.